The mighty magician of Udolpho, the first poetess of romantic fiction, the great enchantress of that generation, the wonder-making lady whose power is truly magical, the woman deemed by many of her contemporaries to be, in every respect, a true genius. Referred to by Nathan Drake, no, not that Nathan Drake, this one, as the Shakespeare of romance writers, Anne Radcliffe was the mother of Gothic literature. And if you need more of an overview about what constitutes a Gothic novel, about some of the tropes and themes, after this, go and check out our other video on the pleasure of terror. Radcliffe popularised the genre, was the most popular writer of her day, and earned the most money from her publications. And on occasion, not only was she considered Shakespeare's equal, but his superior. She is the greatest sorceress in the terrific that has ever appeared. The murder scene in Macbeth melts into thin air when compared to the black and lowering horrors of the attempted assassination in The Italian, her 1797 novel. She routinely received incredibly high praise in the press for her work, with reviewers often highlighting her ability to keep us turning the pages. Her novels are filled with unexplained goings-on, they're teeming with mystery. And so, it would seem, is her life. As Norton puts it, Radcliffe's life resembles one of those manuscripts discovered in a Gothic novel. Its leaves faded and almost indecipherable, pages torn in half, whole chapters missing, spurious passages interpolated by other hands, all adumbrating a secret hidden at the centre. Unlike her novels, in which the things that go bump in the night are eventually brought into the light and given a name, Radcliffe's life remains cloaked in shadows. We simply don't know enough about her. We know stuff, but not much. Victorian poet Christina Rossetti even abandoned her projected biography of Radcliffe because she couldn't glean enough material. This means that we, Radcliffe's readers, are left with limited options. We can accept that we don't know much and leave it at that. We can research and dig for evidence. Or we can take the easy, fun and reckless path and speculate. Let's rumourmonger and make shit up. That's much more exciting than searching for fact and doing due biographical diligence. It seems as though this was the path chosen by a fair few people during what Dale Townsend and Angela Wright call the Radcliffean interregnum, the years in which she became a shadowy recluse, leading to the circulation of all kinds of weird speculative rumours that sought to explain her disappearance. I heard she suffered an extended bout of melancholy and she was forcibly restrained in an ancient country house. Didn't she go mad because she indulged her imagination too much in terror? A friend of a friend told me she was wont to sup on the most indigestible substances to fill her sleep with those phantoms of horror she writes in her novels. People speculated that she was a witchy prophetess who went insane and died. It's easily done, I guess. I mean, whenever I see a celebrity trending on Twitter, my first thought is that they must have either died or made an atrocious controversial take. It's easy to jump to the most diabolical or scandalous conclusions. I would bet good money that Radcliffe wasn't tweeting anything racist. But what is the real story? Before we delve into the rumours and mysteries, what do we actually know about Anne Radcliffe? Anne Ward was born in Holborn, London in 1764. She was the only child of William Ward and Anne Oates. Her family was well connected. Her uncle, Thomas Bentley, was business partners with Josiah Wedgwood of Wedgwood China fame. She was raised in a Unitarian household, Unitarianism being a more socialist, radical branch of the Christian faith. Anne Ward married William Radcliffe in 1787 when she was 23 years old. William worked as a journalist and newspaper editor and wrote for what we might nowadays consider left-leaning publications. Now, we don't know a huge amount about their marriage. We do know they never had any children. Radcliffe is unusual in this sense. No children and a wildly successful career wasn't the typical path for a woman in the late 18th century. And it's important to note that Radcliffe had success, heaps of success, while she was alive. She wasn't a Keats or a Van Gogh, an artist who's only appreciated by the public years after their death. And where other Gothic writers were deemed trashy, their work repetitive or formulaic, Radcliffe was consistently singled out as a shining exception. She published 6 novels in total, and 1 book of travel writing. In chronological order they are The Castles of Athlin and Dunbayne, A Sicilian Romance, The Romance of the Forest, The Mysteries of Udolpho, that's her most famous novel, A Journey Made in the Summer of 1794, that's her travel writing, The Italian, and Gaston de Blondeville. 2 things you might have noticed from that list. Firstly, Radcliffe published a heck of a lot in a very short space of time. 5 novels and 1 book of travel writing in 9 years. And some of these novels are chonk. She worked hard. Secondly, her final novel, Gaston de Blondeville, was published in 1826. That's nearly 30 years after the publication of her previous novel, The Italian. Now, it's worth noting that Radcliffe died in 1823, so Gaston was published posthumously, but that still leaves a gap of 26 years of silence in which Radcliffe retreated from the spotlight, from her incredible fame. It was during this gap, the Radcliffean interregnum, that many people began to speculate. Not only was she famous, and a famous woman, a famous childless woman, no less, now she had mysteriously disappeared. Just like the ghostly apparitions in her novels, Radcliffe had seemingly flitted away into the darkness. The question is, why? Let's investigate. One possibility is that Radcliffe's husband, William, forced her to stop writing. According to contemporary writer Charlotte Smith, writing in 1808, Radcliffe is restrained by the authority of her husband from calling any more spirits from the vasty deep of her imagination. Now, from what we can tell, the Radcliffes had a happy marriage. But we know so little it's impossible to really verify this. We do know that William burned all his wife's papers after her death, and that he apparently kept a very close and watchful eye over her first biographer, Thomas Noon Talfourd, as he compiled his material, suggesting that he wanted total control over how she was depicted. But where does that leave us? Maybe we could make the assumption that he was intense and controlling, but all we've really got to go on is hearsay, unverified opinion, and suspicion. Others believed she had fallen prey to her own imagination, that her effort to create visions of horror had finally driven her into a lunatic asylum. Some thought she had been forced to retire into a remote part of Derbyshire under the most direful influence of deep-rooted, incurable melancholy. There was even a rumour that she had been sequestered against her will in Haddon Hall, near Bakewell, a very Gothic stately home, which was also rumoured to be the inspiration for the settings of her novels. I mean, this makes for a juicy backstory, right? We don't want to entertain the idea that she retired into some kind of domestic happiness when instead she could be locked up in a mouldering ruin, just like one of the heroines of her novels. Oh, how things come full circle. Radcliffe was finally consumed by her dark arts to the extent that she became the leading lady of her own narrative. But alas, no proof. So let's put a pin in our excitement and see what other tantalising tales were doing the rounds. Okay, so if her husband wasn't a big controlling meanie and she wasn't holed up in a castle going insane, what else?
Maybe she died. I mean, she's been silent for so long and nothing is as silent as the grave, right?
There were plenty of rumours circulating that Radcliffe had died, exacerbated by several obituaries published in country newspapers for a different Anne Radcliffe who died in 1809, which were mistakenly attributed to our Anne Radcliffe. Imagine that, a newspaper failing to fact-check and spreading misinformation, those silly people in the olden days being silly. Of course, Radcliffe didn't die in 1809. She probably didn't go mad, she probably wasn't incurably sad, and I'd bet money that she wasn't boarded up in Haddon Hall. It's more likely that she suffered from ill health as she grew older, and that this may have slowed her down. We know that during the last 12 years of her life, she suffered from frequent bouts of asthma attacks, so maybe that played a part, or maybe she just fancied retiring without giving explanation. I mean, she had every right to do that. One thing we can say with some confidence is that Radcliffe was very sensitive to reviews of her work, and it's possible that this led to her reclusivity. You can take one of her novels, read it through, then read the reviews it received, then read her next novel, and see how she took criticisms on board and made adjustments to her style. Now, The Italian, the last novel she would publish in her lifetime, received some harsh critiques. One reviewer called it a complication of horrors without interest. Another suggested that Mrs. Radcliffe has talents which might be better improved, free from the wild extravagancies of the performance under our consideration. Now, this isn't to say The Italian didn't receive good reviews, it certainly did. Her genius and talent were recognised. But we all know how easy it is to let one negative review outweigh 1,000 positive reviews. It seems to me that, according to the press, by the publication of The Italian, Radcliffe had passed her peak. As a writer who seems to have paid attention to criticism, maybe she was hurt by the accusation, maybe she even agreed with it, and this led to her stepping back from the limelight. But while she was sensitive and responsive to reviews, I think it does her a disservice to conclude that she shied away from writing and publishing because of mean reviewers. She exhibited incredible strength in asserting herself within the male-dominated literary landscape and writing unapologetically excellent novels that drew on traditions and philosophies typically reserved for men. So it doesn't seem right to say bad reviews made her disappear from the literary scene, but they could have been a contributing factor. Another possible answer is that it wasn't so much the reviews but the imitators of her style that drove Radcliffe away from publishing. By the late 1790s, the literary landscape was awash with cheap imitations of her writing. If Radcliffe was the ingenious inventor of a literary movement or school, she was also, by that same token, to be held responsible for the monstrous proliferation of Gothic romances that transpired in her fiction's wake. And it's true, if you search for Radcliffe in newspaper databases, you'll find hundreds of reviews of Gothic novels, plays, poems, stories in which Radcliffe is mentioned as a point of comparison to the text under review. A review of a novel called Oakendale Abbey, for example, deemed the work both an imitation of Anne Radcliffe and perhaps one of the most despicable performances that ever appeared. The tremendous ghosts and half-hanged men excite nothing but laughter. There's lots of this kind of thing out there, and lots of reviews that use Radcliffe as an aspirational benchmark. But perhaps the vogue for imitating her style, for taking her elegant and powerful narratives and her careful consideration of the sublime and the beautiful and the terrifying, and turning it into trashy, half-formed prose, left Radcliffe aggrieved. And maybe she felt responsible for inspiring this kind of thing, her success opening the door for the plethora of despicable performances that followed. Ultimately, of course, we don't know why she disappeared from the literary scene for so long. We don't know whether she was pleased that after her disappearance she was still widely admired, her work still avidly read. During the Radcliffean interregnum, and after her death, Radcliffe was a household name. She had achieved an astonishing amount with her writing, both in terms of her fame, her influence, and her financial gain.
But you might be left asking, if this was the case, if Radcliffe was so immensely popular, her work profoundly influential for centuries, why is she relatively unknown today? And when I say relatively, I mean in relation to other household names like Austen, Mary Shelley, the Brontes, Dickens. When I ask people outside of the immediate field of 18th and 19th century literary studies whether they've heard of Radcliffe, some people say they know the name, but a lot of people have never heard of her. To find out how her reputation evolved in the years after her death, and to learn more about what happened to the Gothic genre itself as the 19th century wore on, watch this video next. Or if you want more of an overview of how the Gothic relates to horror media today, click here.